Section 21 of the Aeneid. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by K. Hand. The Aeneid by Virgil, translated by J.W.MacKail. Book 11th, The Council of the Latins and the Life and Death of Camilla, Part 1. Meanwhile dawn arose forth of ocean. Aeneas, though the charge presses to give a space for burial of his comrades, and his mind is in the tumult of death, began to pay the gods his vows of victory with the breaking of the east. He plants on a mound a mighty oak with boughs lopped away on every hand, and arrays it in the gleaming arms stripped from Mezentius the captain, a trophy to thee, mighty lord of war. He fixes on it the plumes dripping with blood, the broken spears, and the corslet struck and pierced in 12 places. He ties the shield of brass on his left hand, and hangs from his neck the ivory sword. Then among his joyous comrades, for all the throng of his captains girt him close about, he begins in these words of cheer: The greatest deed is done, O men, be all fear gone for what remains. These are the spoils of a haughty king, the first fruits won from him. My hands have sent Mezentius here. Now our way lies to the walls of the Latin king. Prepare your arms and courage, and let your hopes anticipate the war. Let no ignorant delay hinder or tardy thoughts of fear keep us back, so soon as heaven grant us to pluck up the standards and lead our army from the camp. Meanwhile let us commit to earth the unburied bodies of our comrades, since deep in Acheron this honour is left alone. Go, says he, grace with the last gifts those noble souls whose blood won us this land of ours. And first let Pallas be sent to Evander's mourning city, he whose valour failed not when the day of darkness took him, and the bitter wave of death. So speaks he weeping, and retraces his steps to the door, where aged Acoetes watched Pallas' lifeless body laid out for burial. Once armour-bearer to Evander in Parrhasia, but now gone forth with darker omens, appointed attendant to his darling foster-child. Around is the whole train of servants with a crowd of Trojans, and the Ilian women with hair unbound in mourning after their fashion. When Aeneas entered at the high doorway they beat their breasts and raise a loud wail aloft, and the palace moans to their grievous lamentation. Himself, when he saw the pillowed head and fair face of Pallas, and on his smooth breast the gaping wound of the Ausonian spearhead, speaks thus with welling tears. Did Fortune in her joyous coming, he cries, O luckless boy, grudge thee the sight of our realm, and a triumphal entry to thy father's dwelling? Not this promise of thee had I given to Evander thy sire at my departure, when he embraced me as I went and bade me speed to a wide empire, and yet warned me in fear that the men were valiant, the people obstinate in battle. And now he, fast ensnared by empty hope, perchance offers vows and heaps gifts on his altars. We, a mourning train, go in hollow honour by his corpse, who now owes no more to aught in heaven. Unhappy! thou wilt see thy son cruelly slain. Is this our triumphal return awaited? Is this my strong assurance? Ah me, what a shield is lost, mine, Iülus, to Ausonia and to thee. This lament done, he bids raise the piteous body, and sends 1,000 men chosen from all his army for the last honour of escort, to mingle in the father's tears. A small comfort and a great sorrow, yet the unhappy parents do. Others quickly plait a soft wicker bier of arbutus rods and oak shoots, and shadow the heaped pillows with a leafy covering. Here they lay him, high on their rustic strewing, even as some tender violet or drooping hyacinth blossom plucked by a maiden's finger, whose sheen and whose grace is not yet departed, but no more does earth the mother feed it or lend it strength. Then Aeneas bore forth 2 purple garments stiff with gold, that Sidonian Dido's own hands, happy over their work, had once wrought for him, and shot the warp with delicate gold. One of these he sadly folds round him, a last honour, and veils in its covering the tresses destined to the fire, and heaps up beside many a Laurentine battle prize, and bids his spoils pass forth in long train, with them the horses and arms whereof he had stripped the enemy, and those with hands tied behind their back, whom he would send as nether offering to his ghost, and sprinkle the blood of their slaying on the flame. Also he bids his captains carry stems dressed in the armour of the foe, and fix on them the hostile names. Unhappy Acoetes is led along, outworn with age; he smites his breast and rends his face, and flings himself forward all along the ground. Likewise they lead forth the chariot bathed in Rutulian blood; behind goes weeping Aethon the war horse, his trappings laid away, and big drops wet his face. Others bear his spear and helmet, for all else is Turnus' prize. Then follow in mourning array the Teucrians and all the Tyrrhenians and the Arcadians with arms reversed. When the whole long escorting file had taken its way, Aeneas stopped, and sighing deep, pursued thus: 'Once again war's dreadful destiny calls us hence to other tears. Hail thou for evermore, O princely Pallas, and for evermore farewell.' And without more words he bent his way to the high walls and advanced towards his camp. And now envoys were there from the Latin city with wreathed boughs of olive, praying him of his grace to restore the dead that lay strewn by the sword over the plain, and let them go to their earthly grave. No war lasts with men conquered and bereft of breath. Let this indulgence be given to men once called friends and fathers of their brides. To them Aeneas grants leave in kind and courteous wise, spurning not their prayer, and goes on in these words: 'What spite of fortune, O Latins, hath entangled you in the toils of war, and made you fly our friendship? Plead you for peace to the lifeless bodies that the battle lot hath slain? I would fain grant it even to the living. Neither have I come but because destiny had given me this place to dwell in, nor wage I war with your people. Your king it is who hath broken our covenant and preferred to trust himself to Turnus' arms. Fitter it were that Turnus had faced death today. If he will fight out the war and expel the Teucrians, it had been well to meet me here in arms, so had he lived to whom life were granted of heaven or his own right hand. Now go and kindle the fire beneath your hapless countrymen.' Aeneas ended. They stood dumb and silent, with faces bent steadfastly in mutual gaze. Then aged Drances, ever young Turnus' assailant in hatred and accusation, with the words of his mouth thus answers him again: 'O Trojan, great in renown, yet greater in arms, with what praises may I extol thy divine goodness? Shall thy righteousness first wake my wonder, or thy toils in war? We indeed will gratefully carry these words to our father's city, and if fortune grant a way, will make thee at one with King Latinus. Let Turnus seek his own alliances. Nay, it will be our delight to rear the massy walls of destiny and stoop our shoulders under the stones of Troy.' He ended thus, and all with one voice murmured assent. 12 days' truce is struck, and in meditation of the peace Teucrians and Latins stray mingling unharmed on the forest heights. The tall ash echoes to the axe's strokes; they overturn pines that soar into the sky, and busily cleave oaken logs and scented cedar with wedges, and drag mountain ashes on their groaning waggons. And now flying Rumour, harbinger of the heavy woe, fills Evander and Evander's house and city with the same voice that but now told of Pallas victorious over Latium. The Arcadians stream to the gates, snatching funeral torches after their ancient use; the road gleams with the long line of flame, and parts the fields with a broad pathway of light. The arriving crowd of Phrygians meets them and mingles in mourning array. When the matrons saw all the train approach their dwellings, they kindle the town with loud wailing. But no force may withhold Evander. He comes amid them; the bier is set down; he flings himself on Pallas, and clasps him with tears and sighs, and scarcely at last does grief leave his voice's utterance free. 'Other than this, O Pallas, was thy promise to thy father, that thou wouldst not plunge recklessly into the fury of battle. I knew well how strong was the fresh pride of arms and the sweetness of honour in a first battle. Ah, unhappy first fruits of his youth and bitter prelude of the war upon our borders! Ah, vows and prayers of mine that no god heard! And thou, pure crown of wifehood, happy that thou art dead and not spared for this sorrow. But I have outgone my destiny in living, to stay here the survivor of my child. Would I had followed the allied arms of Troy, to be overwhelmed by Rutulian weapons. Would my life have been given, and I and not my Pallas were borne home in this procession. I would not blame you, O Teucrians, nor our treaty and the friendly hands we clasped; our old age had that appointed debt to pay. Yet if untimely death awaited my son, it will be good to think he fell leading the Teucrians into Latium, and slew his Volscian thousands before he fell. Nay, no other funeral than this would I deem thy due, my Pallas, than good Aeneas does, than the mighty Phrygians, than the Tyrrhene captains and all the army of Tyrrhenia. Great are the trophies they bring on whom thine hand deals death. Thou also, Turnus, wert standing now, a great trunk dressed in arms, had his age and his strength of years equalled thine. But why, unhappy, do I delay the Trojan arms? Go, and forget not to carry this message to your king. Thine hand it is that keeps me lingering in a life that is hateful since Pallas fell, and Turnus is the debt thou seest son and father claim. For thy virtue and thy fortune this scope alone is left. I ask not joy in life, I may not, but to carry this to my son deep in the underworld. Meanwhile dawn had raised her gracious light on weary men, bringing back task and toil. Now lord Aeneas, how Trojan have built the pyres on the winding shore. Hither in ancestral fashion hath each borne the bodies of his kin. The dark fire is lit beneath, and the vapour hides high heaven in gloom. Thrice, girt in glittering arms, they have marched about the blazing piles, thrice compassed on horseback the sad fire of death, and uttered their wail. Tears fall fast upon earth and armour, cries of men and blare of trumpets roll skyward. Then some fling on the fire Latin spoil stripped from the slain, helmets and shapely swords, bridles and glowing chariot wheels; others familiar gifts, the very shields and luckless weapons of the dead. Around are slain in sacrifice oxen many in number, and bristly swine and cattle gathered out of all the country are slaughtered over the flames. Then crowding the shore, they gaze on their burning comrades, and guard the embers of the pyres, and cannot tear themselves away till dewy night wheels on the star-spangled glittering sky. Therewithal the unhappy Latins far apart build countless pyres and bury many bodies of men in the ground, and many more they lift and bear away to the neighbouring country, or send them back to the city. The rest, a vast heap of undistinguishable slaughter, they burn uncounted and unhonoured. On all sides the broad fields gleam with the crowded rivalry of fires. The third dawn had rolled away the chill shadow from the sky; mournfully they piled high the ashes and mingled bones from the embers, and heaped a load of warm earth above them. Now in the dwellings of rich Latinus' city the noise is loudest, and most the long wail. Here mothers and their sons' unhappy brides, here beloved sisters sad-hearted, and orphan boys curse the disastrous war and Turnus' bridal, and bid him his own self arm and decide the issue with the sword, since he claims for himself the first rank in the lordship of Italy. Drances fiercely embitters their cry, and vouches that Turnus alone is called, alone is claimed for battle. Yet therewith many a diverse worded counsel is for Turnus, and the great name of the queen overshadows him, and he rises high in renown of trophies fitly won. Among their stir, and while confusion is fiercest, lo, to crown all, the envoys from the great Diomedes' city bring their gloomy message. Nothing is to come of all the toil and labour spent; gifts and gold and strong entreaties have been of no avail. Latium must seek other arms, or sue for peace to the Trojan king. For heavy grief King Latinus himself swoons away. The wrath of heaven and the fresh graves before his eyes warn him that Aeneas is borne on by fate's evident will. So he sends imperial summons to his high council, the foremost of his people, and gathers them within his lofty courts. They assemble and stream up the crowded streets to the royal dwelling. Latinus, eldest in years and first in royalty, sits amid them with cheerless brow, and bids the envoys sent back from the Aetolian city tell the news they bring, and demands a full and ordered reply. Then tongues are hushed, and Venulus, obeying his word, thus begins to speak: "We have seen, O citizens, Diomede in his Argive camp, and outsped our way and passed all its dangers, and touched the hand whereunder the land of Ilium fell. He was founding a town, named it Agrippa after his ancestral people, on the conquered fields of Iapygian Garganus. After we entered in, and license of open speech was given, we lay forth our gifts. We instruct him of our name and country, who are its invaders, and why we are drawn to Arpi. He heard us, and replied thus with face unstirred: 'O fortunate races, realm of Saturn, Ausonians of old, how doth fortune vex your quiet and woo you to tempt wars you know not? We that have drawn sword on the fields of Ilium, I forbear to tell the drains of war beneath her high walls, the men sunken in yonder Simois, have all over the world paid to the full our punishment and the reward of guilt. A crew Priam's self might pity, as Minerva's baleful star knows, and as the Euboic reefs and Caphaerus' revenge. From that warfaring driven to alien shores, Menelaus, son of Atreus, is in exile far as Proteus' pillars. Ulysses hath seen the Cyclops of Aetna. Shall I make mention of the realm of Neoptolemus and Idomeneus' household gods overthrown? Or of the Locrians who dwell on the Libyan beach? Even the lord of Mycene, the mighty Achaeans' general, sank on his own threshold edge under his accursed wife's hand, where the adulterer crouched over conquered Asia. I, or that the gods grudged it to me to return to my ancestral altars, to see the bride of my desire, and lovely Calydon. Now likewise sights of appalling presage pursue me; my comrades, lost to me, have soared winging into the sky, and flit birds about the rivers. Ah me, dread punishment of my people! and fill the cliffs with their melancholy cries. This it was I had to look for even from the time when I madly assailed celestial limbs with steel, and sullied the hand of Venus with a wound. Do not, do not urge me to such battles. Neither have I any war with Troy since her towers are overthrown, nor do I remember with delight the woes of old. Turn to Aeneas with the gifts you bear to me from your ancestral borders. We have stood to face his grim weapons, and met him hand to hand. Believe one who hath proved it, how mightily he rises over his shield, in what a whirlwind he hurls his spear. Had the land of Ida borne two more like him, Dardanus had marched to attack the towns of Inachus, and Greece were mourning fate's reverse. In all our delay before that obstinate Trojan city, it was Hector and Aeneas whose hand stayed the Grecian victory, and bore back its advance to the 10th year. Both were splendid in courage, both eminent in arms. Aeneas was first in duty. Let your hands join in treaty as they may, but beware that your weapons close not with his. Thou hast heard, most gracious king, at once what is the king's answer, and what his counsel for our great struggle.' Scarcely thus the envoys, when a diverse murmur ran through the troubled lips of the Ausonians, even as, when rocks delay some running river, it plashes in the barred pool, and the banks murmur nigh to the babbling wave. So soon as their minds were quieted and their hurrying lips hushed, the king, first calling on the gods, begins from his lofty throne. 'Ere now could I wish, O Latins, we had determined our course of state, and it had been better thus, not to meet in council at such a time as now, with the enemy seated before our walls. We wage an ill-timed war, fellow citizens, with a divine race, invincible, unbroken in battle, who brook not even when conquered to drop the sword. If you had hope in appeal to Aetolian arms, abandon it. Though each man's hope is his own, you discern how narrow a path it is. Beyond that you see with your eyes and handle with your hands the total ruin of our fortunes. I blame no one. What valour's utmost could do is done. We have fought with our whole kingdom's strength. Now I will unfold what I doubtfully advise and purpose, and with your attention instruct you of it in brief. There is an ancient land of mine bordering the Tuscan river, stretching far westward beyond Sicanian borders. Auruncans and Rutilians sow on it, work the stiff hills with the ploughshare, and pasture them where they are roughest. Let all this tract with a pine-clad belt of mountain height pass to the Teucrians in friendship. Let us name fair terms of treaty, and invite them as allies to our realm. Let them settle, if they desire it so, and found a city. But if they have a mind to try other coasts and another people, and can abide to leave our soil, let us build twice 10 ships of Italian oak, or as many more as they can man. Timber lies at the water's edge for all. Let them assign the number and fashion of the vessels, and we will supply brass, labour, dockyards. Further, it is our will that 100 ambassadors of the highest rank in Latium shall go to bear our words and ratify the treaty, holding forth in their hands the boughs of peace, and carrying for gifts weights of gold and ivory, and the chair and striped robe, our royal array. Give counsel openly, and succour our exhausted state.' Then Drances again, he whose jealous ill will was wrought to anger and stung with bitterness by Turnus' fame, lavish of wealth and quick of tongue, though his hand was cold in war, held no empty counsellor and potent in faction. His mother's rank ennobled a lineage whose paternal source was obscure. Rises, and with these words heaps and heightens their passion. 'Dark to no man and needing no voice of ours, O gracious king, is that whereon thou takest counsel. All confess they know how our nation's fortune sways, but their words are choked. Let him grant freedom of speech and abate his breath, he by whose disastrous government and perverse way I will speak out, though he menace me with arms and death we see so many stars of battle gone down, and all our cities sunk in mourning, while he, confident in flight, assails the Trojan camp and makes heaven quail before his arms. Add yet one to those gifts of thine, to all the riches thou bidst us send or promise to the Dardanians, most gracious of kings, but one. Let no man's passion overbear thee from giving thine own daughter to an illustrious son and a worthy marriage, and binding this peace by perpetual treaty. Yet if we are thus terror-stricken heart and soul, let us implore him in person plead him of his grace to give way, to restore king and country their proper right. Why again and again hurlest thou these unhappy citizens on perils so evident, O source and spring of Latium's woe? In war is no safety. Peace we all implore of thee, O Turnus, and the one pledge that makes peace inviolable. I the first, I whom thou picturest thine enemy, as I care not if I am, see, I bow at thy feet. Pity thine allies, relent, and retire before thy conqueror. Enough have we seen of rout and death and desolation over our broad lands. Or if glory stir thee, if such strength kindle in thy breast, and if a palace so delight thee for thy dower, be bold, and advance stout-hearted upon the foe. We verily, that Turnus may have his royal bride, must lie scattered on the plains, worthless lives, a crowd unburied and unwept. Do thou also, if thou hast aught of might, if the war god be in thee as in thy fathers, look him in the face who challenges." At these words Turnus' passion blazed out; he utters a groan, and breaks forth thus in deep accents: "Copious indeed, Drances, and fluent is ever thy speech at the moment war calls for action, and when the fathers are summoned thou art there the first. But we need no words to fill our senate house, safely as thou wingest them while the mounded walls keep off the enemy, and the trenches swim not yet with blood. Thunder on in rhetoric, thy wonted way; accuse thou me of fear, Drances, since thine hand hath heaped so many Teucrians in slaughter, and thy glorious trophies dot the fields. Trial is open of what live valour can do, nor indeed is our foe far to seek. On all sides they surround our walls. Are we going to meet them? Why linger? Will thy bravery ever be in that windy tongue and those timorous feet of thine? My conqueror? Shall any justly flout me as conquered, who see Tiber swoln fuller with Ilian blood, and all the house and people of Evander lay low, and the Arcadians stripped of their armour? Not such did Bitias and huge Pandarus prove me, and the 1,000 men whom on one day my conquering hand sent down to hell, shut as I was in their walls and closed in the enemy's ramparts. In war is no safety. Fool, be thy boding on the Dardan's head and thine own fortunes. Go on, cease not to throw all into confusion with thy terrors, to exalt the strength of a twice vanquished race, and abase the arms of Latinus before it. Now the princes of the Myrmidons tremble before Phrygian arms; now Tydeus' son and Achilles of Larissa and Aufidus' river recoils from the Adriatic wave. Or when the scheming villain pretends to shrink at my abuse, and sharpens calumny by terror, never shall this hand keep quiet rob thee of such a soul; with thee let it abide, and dwell in that breast of thine. Now I return to thee, my lord, and thy weighty resolves. If thou dost repose no further hope in our arms, if all hath indeed left us, and one repulse been our utter ruin, and our fortune is beyond recovery, let us plead for peace and stretch forth unarmed hands. Yet had we aught of our wonted manhood, his toil beyond all other is blessed, and his spirit eminent, who rather than see it thus hath fallen prone in death and once bitten the ground. But if we have yet resources, and an army still unbroken, and cities and people of Italy remain for our aid; but if even the Trojans have won their glory at great cost of blood, they too have their deaths, and the storm fell equally on all, why do we shamefully faint even on the threshold? Why does a shudder seize our limbs before the trumpet sound? Often do the days and the varying change of toiling time restore prosperity. Often fortune in broken visits makes man her sport and again establishes him. The Aetolian of Arpi will not help us, but Messapus will, and Tolumnius the fortunate, and the captains sent by many a nation; nor will fame be scant to follow the flower of Latium and the Laurentine land. Camilla the Volscian too is with us, leading her train of cavalry, squadrons splendid in brass. But if I only am claimed by the Teucrians for combat, if that is your pleasure, and I am the barrier to the public good, victory does not so hate and shun my hands that I should renounce any enterprise for so great a hope. I shall meet him in courage. Did he outmatch great Achilles and wear arms like his forged by Vulcan hands? To you and to my father Latinus, I, Turnus, unexcelled in bravery by any of old, consecrate my life. Aeneas calls on him alone; let him, I implore, let not Drances rather appease with his life this wrath of heaven, if such it be, or win the renown of valour." Section 22.